They didn't pull me aside quietly. They didn't send a private email. They announced my termination in front of the entire company on a live call with more than 400 faces watching. One moment I was listening to updates about quarterly sales. The next I heard my name followed by words that felt like a knife. Clara Morgan is no longer with the company. No explanation, no thank you, just a sterile statement read by the CTO as if I were an item being deleted from a spreadsheet. The silence that followed was worse than the announcement itself. For a few seconds, no one breathed. And then the chat exploded. Some people dropped fake sad face emojis, others typed a quick good luck. It was all so hollow, so rehearsed. The people I had mentored, the systems I had built, reduced to a meaningless string of icons on a screen. And me? I just sat there, staring into my camera, knowing they expected me to disappear without a word. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed stone cold. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. They thought they were erasing me, but they had no idea what I still carried with me and how dangerous silence can be when it's deliberate. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know, where are you listening from right now? And tell me this, have you ever felt disposable at work, like your whole contribution could vanish with a single sentence? Leave a comment if this story stirs something in you. Your voice might help someone else realize they're not as alone as they think. When the call ended, I didn't slam my laptop shut or scream into the void like they probably expected. I just sat there watching the screen fade to black, the faint glow of unread Slack messages piling up in the corner. Little pings kept popping up, tiny digital reminders of how quickly people move on. Good luck out there. Sad to see you go. Thanks for everything. The words looked polite on the surface, but every single one felt scripted, like people were just checking a box before getting back to their day. No one asked what really happened. No one dared to say my firing was wrong. The silence between their short messages was louder than the notifications themselves. I closed the lid of my laptop slowly, like I was sealing away a version of myself that no longer existed. My apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. It hit me then. 20 years of late nights, crisis calls, projects, I carried on my shoulders, erased in less than 60 seconds. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. My face felt like stone, but inside something sharper was taking shape. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was focus. I walked over to my desk and placed the company badge on top of a stack of papers. That plastic card had been my key to every room, every system, every part of their empire. Now it was just dead weight. Still, as I looked at it, I couldn't shake the thought. They might believe I was gone, but deep down, I knew I wasn't finished. Not even close. And as I stood there in the silence of that apartment, I realized I still had one thing they didn't. Something they had overlooked. Something they were about to regret. That evening, I finally allowed myself to move around the apartment. The badge was still on my desk, a reminder of the door that had just slammed shut. But there was something else, something I hadn't touched in months. I reached for the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. It stuck for a second, like it always did, before sliding open with a low scrape. Inside was nothing impressive to anyone else: a stack of notebooks, a few receipts, and one small black case. My fingers paused on top of it, pressing lightly, as if testing whether I was really ready to pick it up. When I finally did, the weight of it was heavier than it should have been. I unzipped the case, and there it was, a silver USB drive, plain, unmarked, almost forgettable. But to me, it was anything but ordinary. Etched into the metal in tiny letters was a name only I recognized: Helix Core Final V7. I sat down holding it in my palm, staring at the reflection of the desk lamp on its surface. Memories flooded back. The late nights, the endless testing, the sleepless weeks when I built the backbone of the very system they now claimed was theirs alone. That drive wasn't just storage, it was proof. Proof of the hours, the lines of code, the architecture that I created long before their contracts tried to erase me. For a long while, I didn't move. I just let the silence wrap around me, my mind torn between fear and certainty. Fear because I knew what this drive meant if it ever saw daylight. Certainty because I also knew it was the one thing they couldn't bury, no matter how many signatures they put on paper. I slipped the USB back into the case, zipped it up, and placed it carefully on the desk this time, right beside the discarded badge. Two objects side by side, one that had lost its power and one that might hold all of mine. And as I looked at them, a question formed in my mind, sharp and unshakable. Not if I would use it, but when. A few days later, I sat in the corner office of a law firm in downtown Austin. The air smelled faintly of old leather and fresh coffee, and I could hear the hum of traffic far below. My attorney, a sharp woman named Dana, leaned forward across the table and tapped the stack of papers between us. "These are airtight," she said. "They want you to believe you signed away every right, but contracts like these don't hold forever. Not here, not now." I studied her face, searching for something, certainty, reassurance, maybe even a hint of doubt. Instead, her expression was calm, almost surgical. She slid a highlighted page toward me and tapped a line at the bottom. "There's a new law coming into effect on January 1st. It voids non-compete agreements for software engineers and architects. It means everything they're trying to hold over you collapses." I felt my chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with a strange kind of anticipation. January 1st. A date circled in my mind like a finish line, or maybe the starting gun of something bigger. And until then, I asked quietly. Dana folded her hands. "You keep your head down. You don't take the bait. No emails, no comments online, no sudden moves. You wait. The moment the calendar flips, their grip on you is gone." I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. It wasn't easy, this idea of waiting. I had never been the kind of person to sit still while others rewrote my story. But patience wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And I realized then that silence could be sharper than any weapon if held long enough. When I left the office, the winter sun was already low on the horizon. I walked down Congress Avenue with the city lights flickering on my mind, replaying Dana's words again and again. January 1st. A countdown had begun ticking quietly behind every step I took. And as the wind pressed against my coat, I couldn't shake the feeling that waiting was only half the battle. The real question was what I'd be ready to do when the clock struck midnight. The first thing I did was vanish, not from the city, not from the people I cared about, but from the digital world that had become a net around me. I opened my laptop one last time, not to fight, but to erase. My LinkedIn profile disappeared with a single click. GitHub archived every trace hidden. Slack channels, email addresses, old commits under my name, all scrubbed or shut down. Each deletion felt like cutting a string, like severing a cord that tied me back to them. I wasn't running away. I was slipping under the radar, becoming someone they couldn't predict, someone they couldn't track. When friends reached out, "What happened? Are you okay?" I replied with vague, polite sentences, never enough detail to be pinned down, taking some time, figuring out next steps. The less they knew, the safer it was. Even my closest allies understood the tone in my voice. Don't ask more. Not yet. That night, I registered a new LLC under a name that wasn't mine, Rowan Hale. Just seeing the paperwork with that name made me pause. It didn't feel like me, but maybe that was the point. Rowan was a shield, a ghost identity to move forward with. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. Nobody outside that dimly lit apartment in Austin knew what I was building or why. And that secrecy was power. Still, disappearing came with its own kind of loneliness. There were moments staring at a blank screen in the middle of the night when I wondered if I'd gone too far. But every time that doubt crept in, I reminded myself, visibility is a trap. Silence is protection. I closed the laptop, the glow fading into darkness. The badge was gone. The old accounts were gone. What remained was only the work ahead, hidden in plain sight. And as I leaned back in the chair, a thought surfaced sharper than the quiet around me. If I was now a ghost, then soon enough, they were going to learn how dangerous ghosts can be. The apartment turned into something between a workshop and a bunker. The blinds stayed shut most days, the only light coming from the glow of monitors stacked side by side. My kitchen table became a command center. Wires, sketches, coffee cups, and rows of sticky notes with scribbled phrases only I could understand. At first, it was just me, but soon, two names from my past answered the quiet call. Devin, a back-end genius I trusted with systems more than anyone else, and Kara, a designer who could translate chaos into something clean, usable, human. We met in whispers, in late-night calls, in coffee shops where no one knew our faces. By the time they joined me in Austin, the project already had a heartbeat. Days bled into nights as we coded, tested, broke things, then rebuilt them better. There was no office politics here, no layers of bureaucracy, just raw focus. Every keystroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to erase. I remember one night around 3 in the morning when Kara leaned back from the screen and laughed softly. "Do you realize what we're doing? This is cleaner, faster, lighter than anything they could ever build." She was right. Every line of code felt sharper, every system smoother. What had taken them entire departments and endless budgets to cobble together, we were rebuilding stronger with just 3 people in the shadows. But the work came at a cost. Sleep disappeared. Meals were replaced with whatever we could grab between tests. Some nights, I caught myself staring at the window, wondering if the world outside even knew we existed anymore. That question both scared me and fueled me, because maybe that was the point, to create something so strong, so undeniable, that when it finally surfaced, it wouldn't just compete with them, it would expose how fragile they really were. And in the middle of one of those sleepless nights, as the code finally clicked into place, I realized the shadows weren't just where we worked. They were where we grew stronger. It started with a single post, anonymous, quiet, almost invisible. A sentence dropped into a niche forum where engineers shared rumors about new tools and unproven projects. Just 7 words. Anyone heard about Argus? Something's coming. That was it. No details, no proof. But I knew how fast curiosity spreads when you speak the right language in the right corner of the internet. And sure enough, within hours, replies stacked up. Some dismissed it, some speculated wildly. Others claimed to have heard whispers from inside companies they wouldn't name. The seed was planted. Over the next few days, more fragments appeared. A graph without a label, a benchmark with no source, a tagline stripped down to 3 words: stronger, faster, smarter. None of it tied back to me or my team. None of it could be traced. But together, the pieces painted a shadowy outline, just enough to unsettle anyone who thought they were untouchable. Inside my old company, I imagined the tension spreading, meetings called without notice, Slack threads lit up with speculation, leaders trying to calm their teams while secretly messaging one another late into the night. Who's building this? Where did Argus come from? I didn't need to watch it happen to know it was working. Fear leaves a pattern you can almost feel in the air. They had once used silence to erase me. Now I was using silence to haunt them. One evening, Devin leaned over and asked, half joking, "Do you think they know it's you?" I smiled but didn't answer. The truth was, it didn't matter. Suspicion alone was enough. Suspicion eats away at confidence faster than proof ever could. As I logged off that night, a new thought struck me, sharper, heavier. If whispers could shake them this much, what would happen when the first undeniable crack appeared in their armor? It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into tremors. The company I once gave everything to began showing the first cracks. I heard through old colleagues, ones who still slipped me the occasional message, that customers were starting to ask hard questions. Contracts that were once automatic renewals suddenly stalled. A few even demanded early refunds after unexplained outages brought entire dashboards crashing down. Inside, the tension was visible to anyone watching. Status pages that usually stayed clean lit up with red warnings. Tickets piled up faster than the support team could respond. And the developers, the same ones who had sat stone-faced during my dismissal, were now scrambling, pulling 16-hour shifts just to keep the system upright. Then came the leaks. Screenshots of frantic Slack threads slipped into the wild. Arguments between engineers and managers, full of blame and desperation, surfaced on forums they swore were private. Words like unsustainable, band-aid, and failure cascade began to circle like vultures. I read every line, quietly, almost detached, but deep inside I felt the pulse of vindication. They had once acted as if my work was disposable. Now they were learning how fragile their empire really was without it. One night, Devin forwarded me a message from a friend still inside. They're panicking. The CTO is demanding answers nobody has. They keep asking about Argus, if it's real, if it's connected. People are scared. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. Fear was spreading, and fear was powerful. It corrodes trust, it twists communication, it makes leaders second-guess every decision. But as satisfying as it was to watch them unravel, I knew this was just the beginning. Rumors and outages could only weaken them so much. To truly break the illusion of control, something undeniable had to surface, something they couldn't dismiss as coincidence or gossip. And that moment was coming faster than they realized. By the time the cracks in their walls grew visible to everyone, I was already working on something far sharper than rumors or outages. I had held on to it quietly, like a blade wrapped in cloth, waiting for the right moment to draw it. The proof wasn't just in the USB drive, it was in every archive I had kept long before they pushed me out. Source files, architecture diagrams, version histories stamped with my name. Pieces of a puzzle only I knew how to arrange. To them, these were invisible. To me, they were undeniable. I spent nights organizing everything into a single, unbreakable package. Every commit aligned with timestamps, every design note paired with email trails that predated their contracts. Devin reviewed the logs line by line. Kara cross-checked the diagrams against public patents. What we built wasn't just code, it was evidence, a map that showed where my work ended and where they had quietly absorbed it without acknowledgement. One evening, Kara looked up from her screen, her eyes tired but sharp. "This isn't just strong," she said. "This is ironclad. Once this is seen, they can't explain it away." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded, because she was right. This wasn't noise on a forum or whispers in a Slack thread. This was a foundation shaking from beneath their feet. And once it hit daylight, no lawyer, no executive, no spin doctor would be able to contain it. And yet, I wasn't rushing. Timing mattered more than force. A weapon like this doesn't need to be swung wildly. It needs to be placed with precision in the exact spot where it can't be ignored. As I locked the files into an encrypted folder and slid the drive back into its case, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was preparation. Because the weapon was ready. All that remained was choosing the moment to strike. And that moment was closer than they thought. The letter went out on a Monday morning. Plain white envelope, black ink, nothing flashy. But inside was a storm wrapped in legal language. Cease and desist. I didn't need to imagine the reaction. I could almost feel it ripple across the city the moment their legal team opened it. Every page carried precision timestamps, commit histories, diagrams with my name embedded in metadata. It wasn't accusation, it was fact, and facts have weight. By noon, I heard the first echoes. A friend inside the company texted me just 2 words: "It's chaos." Executives pulled into emergency calls. Developers yanked out of their regular work and shoved into war rooms. Screens lit with red alerts as teams tried to isolate the modules at the center of the claim. But here was the truth they couldn't. The code they had taken wasn't a branch they could simply cut away. It was the trunk, the very thing their product leaned on. Pull it out and the whole system collapsed. Leave it in and they were in violation. I pictured the CTO pacing, snapping at engineers, demanding explanations no one could give. I pictured the board members sitting in silence as the letter was read aloud, each line heavier than the last. And I pictured the Slack channels, the same ones where they once celebrated my dismissal, now filled with panic, blame, and finger-pointing. For me, there was no shouting, no adrenaline rush, just calm. I didn't need to raise my voice. The letter spoke louder than I ever could. Still, as the dust began to rise inside their walls, I knew this was only the first wave. Cease and desist was never the endgame. It was the opening move of something much bigger. And the next step would take place somewhere they couldn't spin or bury it, a courtroom. The day of the hearing felt colder than it should have. Not just the winter air outside, but the silence that settled over the courtroom as we all took our seats. The company's legal team filled one side of the room, a wall of expensive suits and stiff faces. On the other side, it was just me, Dana, and a stack of carefully organized binders. The judge entered, and the murmur of voices cut off instantly. Papers shuffled, pens clicked, my heart pounded, but my expression stayed still. I wasn't here to shout, I wasn't here to beg, I was here to prove. Their lawyers went first, speaking with the kind of confidence money can buy. They painted me as reckless as someone who had violated agreements, stolen time, threatened the very fabric of their business. I listened without flinching, every accusation landing like a dull thud against armor I had already built. When it was our turn, Dana rose calmly. She didn't waste words. She laid down facts, piece by piece. Commit histories tied to my name. Documents time-stamped before my employment contract. Diagrams that matched perfectly with the files in their current system. And then the final card, the new law effective January 1st, declaring non-compete clauses for engineers unenforceable. I watched the shift happen like a slow-motion collapse. The judge leaned forward. The opposing attorneys exchanged nervous glances. The CTO, sitting behind them, went pale. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was quieter than that, more devastating. The weight of inevitability sinking in. For the first time since that Zoom call, I felt the balance tilt. Not in my favor, but toward the truth. When the session ended, the judge's words were brief but final. The company's claims would not stand. My work was mine. As we stepped outside into the crisp air, Dana glanced at me and said softly, "They just realized the law was never on their side." And yet, even in victory, I knew this wasn't the end, because the courtroom was only one battlefield. The real reckoning, the one that would change everything, was still to come. The courtroom victory wasn't the end. It was the door opening to something new. Within weeks, negotiations began. What started as a bitter fight turned into a settlement that forced the company to pay out more than I ever earned in 2 decades of loyal work. They didn't do it because they wanted to. They did it because they had no choice. But here's the twist. I didn't burn the bridge to the ground. Instead, I built something across it. Using their payout and the license fees that followed, I launched my own company under the name we had been building quietly in the shadows. Devin and Kara stood with me not as employees, but as partners. Together, we turned what was once their weapon against me into a tool for our future. As for the old company, they survived, but they were never the same. Their reputation cracked, their confidence shaken. The CTO, the one who dismissed me so coldly, eventually disappeared from the headlines. Funny how fast arrogance fades when the foundation crumbles. I kept the silver USB drive in my desk drawer, not as ammunition, but as a reminder. I never even had to plug it in. Its presence alone was enough. Looking back, I realized something. It was never really about revenge. Revenge burns fast and leaves ashes. What I found instead was leverage, the power to turn loss into momentum and betrayal into opportunity. And maybe that's the real story here. Not how they tried to erase me, but how I learned to write the next chapter on my own terms. So let me ask you, if you were in my position, would you have chosen revenge or revenue?